We are coming to you live from Cornerstone Studios in New York. You have waited 18 minutes for this Facebook Live event. Mwah! We love you. My name is Summer. I'm the head of Cornerstone Studios, and you have just joined Digital Natives Are Coming. Yeah, I know. This is going to be a good one. You're going to be glad you hung on. I'm joined by two phenomenal people. This is Megan Grace, generational researcher and author. Doug Seegers, Cornerstone's own head of original content. Let's dive right in. We've already taken enough time. All right, let's start with the basics. Megan, you are a noted researcher in this space. Your book, Generation Z, A History in the Making, is a centuries in the making, apologies, is phenomenal. Help us put some parameters around Generation Z. Why do we call them digital natives?
Yeah, so Generation Z is our generation that's born between 1995 and 2010. And it's important to note the years because 95 is the same year the internet was commercialized. So they're digital natives in the sense that they've never lived in a world without the internet and technology as we know it today. They don't remember a time before having digital technology. And so they're native to this digital world where previous generations have kind of wandered through it. And sometimes people call previous generations digital nomads because we've kind of wandered into the space and figured it out. Yeah. So our digital natives, really, it's hardwired into their DNA, but it is hardwired into who they are, how they navigate the world, how they take in information and connect with others.
I love that. Doug, what do you think about this generation?
Completely. I mean, it's not just the internet, it's also smartphones. Smartphones are a huge marker. You just think like 12, 13 years ago when the iPhone came out, can't live in a world without it. Just the access to information, the ability to look at 24 hours a day, look up whatever you want and have access to content is huge. So I think in terms of Gen Z, they're just like content consumers. They grew up consuming content and creating it as well.
I love that. I love that. So as we think about this program that you guys saw in that lovely graphic while you were waiting, DNA, Digital Native Advancement, our intent in building this was really around empowering this newest generation in the workplace and categorically not to just define them. So let's dive into that a second. What are the skills and talents that this group is bringing to the workplace?
So what we're seeing in our research, which primarily focuses on their motivation, perspectives, values, and some of their behaviors, is they're very hardworking and determined, but they also very much so care about people and are concerned about people. And I think a unique skill that they learn outside of the workplace is the ability to become informed on social issues and how that's made them empathetic. And understanding of social issues and a desire to address those social issues, I think is going to lead to this really unique skill and empathy in the workplace and the ability to be caring team members and to care about the people they work with. And that's a skill that I'm definitely looking forward to having them exhibit in the workplace.
Wow, I'd love a little more empathy in the workplace. That sounds awesome. Doug, what was most surprising to you building this program? What did you love to discover?
I mean, I think for me, one of the biggest pieces was it kind of is attached to, or I guess a follow-up to what Megan just said, in terms of just like, you know, like really diving in and looking at the demographics of who Gen Z is and saying like, wait, this is like the most diverse generation yet. And I think with that that diversity and access to information, there is an awareness about the impact that they have in the world around them, you know? And I think it's a major, it was like kind of a light bulb going off and saying, wow, you know, a lot of things kind of add up in terms of Gen Z's desire to make an impact in the world. And like how, you know, and the explanation around why they see the world the way that they do. So I think that was a thing. It was more of like kind of connecting the dots in terms of the research itself that kind of sent us down that path.
I love that connection of wanting to make an impact with huge capacity for empathy. How do we see this at play in the workplace? What can we expect as managers, as leaders, welcoming this new generation in?
I think that if we're playing it right, we build really good connections with them and be the people they do care about, because I don't necessarily know if it's unique to this generation, but people care about the people that they work with, but that takes this element of building a good relationship. And with this generation, putting that very much at the forefront of seeing work as an extension of their home life, an extension of their community, they want to impact those places and create positive change in those spaces. And I think anytime we have the energy of a young generation that wants to change the world, we should harness that to the best that we can. Like in my opinion, I was like, they have the most energy right now. Like, let's let them do good things and change the world.
Wow. So what advice can we give to managers around architecting this environment in parallel with being truly authentic leaders?
I think that managers have this really awesome and unique place with digital natives and Gen Z because they can construct the work environment. They can construct these positive and developmental environments for new employees and young employees to really set the trajectory for their future careers and the skills and values they're going to learn early in their career and how that projects into their future. But I think there's this unique role that managers can fill in for what Generation Z is looking for in leaders, and that is authentic humans that are credible and talented at their jobs. And this element of really those people are coaches. They're not just investing in organizations as a whole, but they're investing in individuals within those organizations for the betterment both of the organization and the individual, and really guiding people along the way in their career, not just delegating out tasks, but investing in the humans in those roles.
Wow. I think that should be the top of all of our JDs.
Right,
authentic
right.
humans needed. Doug, talk to me about this program where you see this at play here.
Like with DNA specifically, we built out a program that kind of prioritizes exactly what Megan was saying. It's like, kind of best practices and tips around interpersonal skills and communication. That kind of prioritizes like, hey, this is e-learning. We have 2-minute and less pieces of content that push them out into engaging with their managers, their peers, their coworkers, the larger organization as a whole. We're very conscious about, hey, let's arm you with some tools, arm you with some best practices, and then push you back out into the real world to use them, not be locked down and online learning that's really just about you and the computer or the screen that you're sitting in front of.
I love that. We threw out a Twitter poll this week, and we asked you, what is the skill you most want to develop in your digital native employees? Now remember, data shows us that by the end of 2020, next year, 20% of the US workforce will be digital natives. That number explodes when you look at a world forum, but what you told us is that you want leadership and communication, that this is what you want to prioritize, and this is really DNA.
Yeah.
Talk to us about this program.
Yep. The core of it is, where we're starting is with communication and interpersonal skills with an eye towards being leaders, like tapping into that entrepreneurial spirit of Gen Z and really pushing that forward, because that really is about leadership, right? Taking control and impacting the organizations that they're in. It's the absolute kind of like one of our core guiding principles of the program as a whole.
I love that, and I found that during the development of this program too, so much of the people skills concept behind it is, a lot of it is at its core is just fundamental things that we kind of miss, or things that we also assume when people come into the workforce they've been trained on, or they understand how to delegate or give feedback or be critiqued. In your research, Megan, what have you seen around this generation and these kind of people skills, communication levels? How does that kind of coincide?
Yeah, it's interesting because they crave human connection, but sometimes it can be a really vulnerable space to put yourself in. When we think about criticism and feedback, those are really vulnerable spaces, and to feel anxiety around getting negative or critical feedback and walking into those spaces confidently, I think is something that we have to be really mindful of. And I think that what DNA does is it presents information in a really peer-to-peer way to guide young employees and new employees through some sticky topics. But I think we're seeing that this generation spends a lot of time online. Nothing against that, but there's also this being able to practice these in-person skills that are really necessary. And I think DNA does a good job of giving them really tangible, succinct information. But it's primed for, go have a conversation with your manager and your team about it, to really talk about how to apply that skill or to integrate that content into your work life, which I think is important because it allows them to practice those important team-oriented and people-oriented skills.
I love that springboard approach.
Yep.
So often learning content, especially in a virtual space, is kind of relegated to, I do this online and then I go back to work and do these things. We tried to bridge the gap with DNA. I want to share with you another little interesting tidbit. We did another poll last week, and we asked you, to what extent do you plan to modify your learning programs that are already in process based on this incoming generation? 42% said making minor changes, pretty small. 36% said not at all. So let's go back to this program and think about what advice can we give to the managers, to the admins in kind of architecting this environment that supports Gen Z as they come into the workplace? What did you discover, Doug?
I mean, I think it's interesting. We talked a little bit about that stat prior to going live. I think it's really interesting, going back to a conversation that we had with a pretty big client early on in the development of the program. They're like, we understand that this is really important, but in terms of a prioritization and prioritizing this content over something else, we're not there, but we know we're going to be there next year. So that's really fascinating to me in terms of we know we're going to need to do this, but in terms of the other pieces right now, we're not quite there yet. But I think it's a super important thing for us to be looking at. I think we had a conversation early on around what you're doing with DNA is kind of pre-predicting disruption. And I love that you said that in terms of, because it's been something that's resonated in terms of that conversation that we had early on around what's coming in this kind of critical mass of digital natives entering the workforce.
I love that, and I think in general, learning programs in the workplace, this generation might be the one to push us past that thinking that learning is ever done, that programs are ever built and sealed and delivered. This generation is going to force us to kind of rectify that concept of learning as always happening, always growing, always changing. As a learning practitioner myself, I've gone through those hard days of spending so much time to build something that was so beautiful, and by the time you deliver it, the needs have changed, the population has changed. And I think this is a message of empowerment that learning does not have to be polished artifacts of things. It can be challenging and empowering, almost that springboard concept. Megan, in your research, especially with college students, people going through the higher ed program, what is that kind of appetite for learning content that you're witnessing?
Yeah, so there's this desire to learn intrapersonally, alone, self-guided and reflective, which it lends really well to online learning. But there's also still this desire for experiential, hands-on, real-world learning of how do I take it and apply it somewhere. It's great to just read something, but what can I actually do with it? And I think that we're seeing that in college classrooms, we're seeing it in K-12 classrooms, this idea of having to pair both that individual learning with what does it mean for group setting and navigating that space. And so I think it's important that we don't think of any learning opportunity as just sit down, do a training, and be done with it, because it's just not realistic. That's actually also not deep learning, and that's just clicking buttons is not applying that learning. It's just showing that you can click the right buttons, and so
really fast
and getting through it. And so it's a matter of true deep learning is a matter of having conversations about it. It's about building relationships around it. It's creating paths of how you're actually going to apply it, which I think is really important in the workplace because we're never done learning our job. Especially in today's economy and the job market. Jobs are changing faster, skills that are needed are changing faster. And so the conversation around personal growth and opportunities for growth is something that's really present with Generation Z and digital natives so that they're prepared for what is next within this organization, but it's also what's next down the road in my career.
I like that.
And so it's really woven into how they're looking. Skill development is really woven into how they're thinking about careers. And that's important to note in how we're training.
But do you also think I'm curious to pull on that a little bit, in terms of the expectation of digital natives coming into the workforce? They've grown up being able to YouTube anything they want to know, like a tutorial, and I think there's this expectation to continue to learn and then put that into practice to be better, whether that's within an organization itself or when I look forward to kind of my career as a whole. I think that's it's inherent, and they're coming in this kind of I want to learn more, I want to be better, and I expect that because I've had access to that information. I just need the streamlining and the curation and the prioritization of what's really important for me within an organization, but then on the broader sense as well.
Yeah, I mean, they have lived in a world where online tutorials from everything from makeup to how to do their stats homework is present and online. And so being guided through video, being guided and really self-guided to utilize the resources that are available. But this is a generation that's grown up with more information and more access to these resources than any other generation. I would have never thought 10 years ago to be like, I should go to YouTube to learn how to change a tire. But that's just like the nature of learning today is that there's a lot of content creators and there's a lot of content out there. And so the learning is present. And I think they're innate learners, which is really cool for this space especially.
The undercurrent of that to me is also this expectation of learning and expectation of content that does not look and feel like I am telling you to learn this thing, but something that meets me where I'm at as a content consumer.
Yeah.
As we think about this kind of voracious content appetite, we talked about that a lot. Doug, talk to us a little bit about some of the kind of guiding principles we took around DNA to make sure that it resonated with this generation.
Sure. I mean, I think first and foremost, like coming in, I was like looking at learning content, thinking how can we make this engaging? How can we make this familiar, and actually deliver something? And even down like all the different variables. Like, hey, we knew this was going to be a short content. We were going to have quick bites in and out, leaning into a lot of the things around like Gen Z and digital natives' ability to process information quickly, but also like bring it in and like deliver a learning object or whatever we were teaching in a very, very quick capacity, while also being really authentic and personal about it, right? We start all of the lessons with testimonials from digital natives where they're asking a question, posing a problem, and then we come in and very quickly deliver an answer or a solution or propose how to handle a specific topic in kind of that framework of kind of interpersonal skills and communication. So I think that was a big piece of it, and just making it like really visual and modern and fast and references that kind of resonate, and being kind of like taking a step back and say, okay, when we're approaching content at this kind of level with digital natives and Gen Z, it's like we want to be mindful of who these people are as people, right? You say as authentic humans, and saying, this is about diversity and inclusion and a little bit of edginess and humor, and being cognizant of those things and building those into I'm cheesy now, the DNA of the program, really. That was all decided before the actual name of the program, ironically.
Well, and that's what I love about it. I think the progression of this program from both a high fidelity consumer grade lens as well as anchored in actual learning. And I think most of the conversations I've had with professionals, with customers, has been around, well, can it really be learning it if it's 2 minutes? And I think for me, I mean, to ever determine the validity of something based on its brevity or length is nonsense. But when you look at one of these lessons and you see how much is baked in through transitions, through motion, through signposting, through signaling, through on-screen text, through transitions, I mean, it's a powerful experience. And I mean, I've just been profoundly moved.
Well, I will tell you, it's been an interesting experience in creating content that maxes out at less than 2 minutes, because it's harder to create impactful content in a very short, succinct way than to build it out over a period of time. I mean, it's hard enough to do with micro-learning, which is what this framework is based on. When you kind of come into this more like quote-unquote nano, less than 2 minutes, having a beginning and a middle and an end and a key takeaway, and really bringing people in and having to be really smart about how you deliver that is not as easy as it might appear on paper.
Yeah, I think a lot of the discussion around kind of shorter content or powerful content gets into these, what I like to call kind of jazz hand space. Like there's just a lot of splash and color, but what's been profound watching it be developed and working with our team as well, and even sharing it with you, Megan, the lessons and the pith of this program resonates far beyond just this generation. Can you talk to us a little bit about, so I'm Gen X, right? I'm Gen X. Nobody cares about Gen X, but I love saying that because I've experienced the last 15 years in this space of people talking millennial this and millennial that, and a lot of just kind of categorical paintbrush style around generations. With Gen Z and what I've come to learn from you around digital natives, it's really anchored in this technology space.
Yeah.
Help us kind of see past just this generational moniker as something that is really going to impact and disrupt the workplace.
Yeah. So I think the thing that stands out to me is it feels like a peer-to-peer conversation, and regardless of generation, talking about struggles in the workplace or talking about things you want to learn or whatever that might be, doing that with a peer is so much easier, and it allows learners to talk and explore some stickier topics, like how to use your voice when you might be the most junior person in the room is always a tough conversation, regardless of what generation you're in, or thinking about how to provide feedback to your manager is really tough. And I think that it allows it in this personal peer-to-peer, authentic space of it's more like advice giving than it is here's how to do your job, X, Y, Z, ABC, 1, 2, 3, whatever your bullet point is. It really is tangible, and it puts it in this real life scenario of something you can walk away with, like one thing you can do. And I think that regardless of whatever generation you're in, like you can pull the one thing you're supposed to do and think about how you apply it. And it's really, as I was kind of like engaging with some of the content, you walk away and you're just like, I can remember the one thing I'm supposed to do. And like, if you think about the busyness of any day of any industry, you're like, I have one thing I need to do to think about being a better employee, a teammate, a manager. It's present there. It's like, I don't want to use like too cliche, but like it's a food for thought. It's like a snack for thought. And you can just like
snack for thought.
A snack for thought. And you just
Snack
you're like
for thought.
thinking about it as you're walking around. But that's how you improve upon things, is you keep it in the back of your mind.
I love that.
Yeah, and I think it's like it's been really rewarding to now, like, you work on a project, it comes out, you're learning, you put it in front of people, and one of the most rewarding things is like some, not target audience initially when we set out, definitely not digital natives, watching that being like, wow, I never thought of it that way. I need to share this with my team, or you know who needs this? Our marketing team. Oh, you know who needs this? The finance team. Like, and you're like, oh, this is truly resonating out. And some of the lessons are probably more straight up like tactical, here, 1, 2, 3, and some of them are to your point around, how do you even get this conversation started in the first place, right? It's a little less direct and a little more nuanced, I think, in terms of helping to provide some guidance and advice, or even just best practices for things that we know, being in this industry for 20 years and being at the kind of forefront of professional learning, where we've had those conversations with clients. We've kind of coalesced a lot of information in a place to say, wow, we're going to create this program. What topics and subtopics do we choose? There was a lot, and we've already heard coming back from clients. Could you do one on actual just phone etiquette? Could you do one on like how you interact internally versus externally? Like they've started to kind of come in, and which I guess is a good indication of like, hey, I think we're doing something right here.
We need more snacks for thought.
We do need more snacks. Everyone needs more snacks.
Always more snacks. Never said no snacks.
I've loved that response, and as I think about the program as a whole, and we've talked about it, they're like, okay, well, some of these things people should just know. And I think for myself, given my career and kind of the learning space, that assumption is what causes the most disruption in the workplace. When we assume that our new direct reports understand how I want sensitive or important information communicated to me, when my team understands my expectations around meetings or emails that are sent out, or engaging with peers or working across teams, we make a lot of assumptions about all of our employees in the workplace. And yet these are not things we're taught in college. And these are things that nuance across workplaces as well. Anything else you want to say about that?
Well, yeah, I would even say on top of that, you're like right on. And part of it is like, maybe we are enlightening or teaching somebody something they didn't know. It's also about reinforcing a lot, and particularly with this program around the technology and aspects of like, it's not just digital natives coming into the workforce who have engaged with technology differently. It's also everyone else in the organization. And I think being back to a really specific lesson around, hey, when do I send information via an email versus a text versus a phone call versus an in-person conversation? And that's been one of those ones that's really resonating with people in terms of like, wow, I didn't think about using messaging technology in that capacity. So those pieces too, it's like it's changing. So even the things that we were taught are changing so much with technology in the workplace.
Yeah, I think some of the topics as well they span generation in the sense that treating your team members like humans and being authentic about it is not necessarily unique to Generation Z and digital natives, but they might just be screaming it the loudest. Like previous generations also want those things. They might just be bringing some of these things to a boiling point that they're prioritizing it higher than previous generations, but it's going to be helpful for everyone to have authentic and true leaders that are themselves and also good at their jobs. So I think that is just one example of how it touches on things that are going to help with just having, again, that conversation about expectations, about how to receive certain information and how to send certain information in different communication methods, like removes this big misunderstanding that's been present in the workplace for generations and decades. So I think it's helpful for a lot of people, regardless of age. It's just really designed to capture the young energy of digital natives, but that's not a bad energy.
I just had one of those specific lessons because maybe we were watching and talking about it again, like kind of pop into my head where we have it's almost like a thematically it looks like a video game and it's about leveling up, and it's we go through this thing up to the top, and when you were saying that, it popped into my head, that kind of like leveling up thing where topping off what you know, making people better, that whole kind of like growing towards something bigger and more contributory.
And that's real learning. I think that's what this space needs, not these kind of false paradigms of learning is highly architected and spans 6 months and takes all this time. Learning is what I need now as an employee. Learning helps me get to that next level. I was thinking specifically of lesson 2 where it talks about how to communicate information, and while we were going through production, they had sent over a script. One of the team had sent me something to review, and it sent all this information through kind of a messaging service, and my response was, lesson 2, this is an email communication. But it was that great moment of, I've never clarified this. I've never said, hey, this is when you send me emails. This is when you send me texts. This is when you send up a red flag.
And I think that goes back to that kind of expectation about what you learn and how you communicate in the most kind of efficient and effective ways to do it. And not everybody's on the same page, like personally, let alone professionally from an organization standpoint.
Yes. Oh, I agree. Look, you guys have hung on with us. Those of you that are still on, thank you. We love you. I think this has been about 25 minutes of fantastic conversation. I mean, I'm enjoying myself. But I'd love to go to the feed, see if there's any live questions that you've been posting, and we're happy to answer that. In the meantime, you're definitely going to want to check out the reel for DNA, Digital Native Advancement. You can find that on cornerstoneondemand.com. And that is being released over the next couple weeks to Cornerstone customers that have our Content Anytime Professional Skills subscription. So you're definitely going to want to check that out. While we wait for some of these questions to come in, Doug, do you want to talk about kind of our follow-on program that we're working with Megan on?
Sure. So we are working on, the DNA was really geared towards digital natives and kind of like interpersonal skills and communication based training. And so the flip side of that, or the bookend, I guess, is the managers and the admins and the leaders at organizations and kind of welcoming Gen Z and digital natives into their organizations and how to best collaborate and build out and architect environments, as we like to say, in order for them to be successful and really collaborate and contribute to their organizations. That's what we're doing right now, where that's coming out in Q1. It will drop in Q1 inside of our leadership and management subscription. And are we dropping the name? Is that?
I think this would be a fantastic time to do that.
So we have DNA for learners, and we have Plan Z for managers and admins, and kind of anyone who wants to better understand digital natives and how they are going to contribute and collaborate in the workplace.
So I love that. It's a perfect segue. We have our first question coming in from Twitter. How do you think we can avoid the trap of stereotyping Gen Z like we have done to millennials? Close to my heart. Thank you, questioner.
That is a great question.
Talk to us, Megan.
I mean, the biggest one is to know and understand that Generation Z exists. They're different than millennials, big piece there. But also understand that there's research out there, but don't take a paintbrush and apply it to everyone just based on age. Keep that in the back of your mind, but the core of really understanding generations is taking time to get to know them, and taking a little bit of time to build relationships and understand a little bit more of the motivation behind things. And so I think that's the biggest thing is we can think about generational research as really important and helpful of thinking about the aggregate and thinking about this collective group of people, but in that collective group of people there are individuals that exist to make that possible, and that's where we really have to focus our time is really balancing the two of understanding the large group but also recognizing the individual.
Along the same lines, and to kind of echo on that question, there was a lot of I've heard, why is this any different than the millennial conversation we were having 15 years ago, 10 years ago? Can you speak to that for a moment in terms of the answer to that question? Because I've been posed that directly a couple of times now.
Well, I think that in something that I'm super passionate about in our work is that when we're doing research, we're not just saying what's happening, we're talking about why it's happening. And that removes a lot of this disdain around different generations, that if we really distill down when we get some piece of quantitative research that's telling us, again, 75% of a generation feels this way, we pay attention to it. But we never just like chip away a little bit more to be like, what is actually influencing that? Why is that taking place? And when we do that, it helps us realize that it's not just like the young people are banding up against the old people and saying like, everything you do is antiquated. And that's where we get all of this, like when we do that, we get this distaste and this distrust that like kids these days are doing this, and then older generations have no idea. And that is not productive at all. None whatsoever. And so, yeah, it's different, and something that I'm passionate about is just making sure that we have that in the back of our mind when we're thinking about generations. Like, we have to recognize generations exist. Like, we go through life thinking about the world differently because our worlds were different when we grew up. So
I love that. I think I'm the old generation in that paradigm, which makes me very sad. All right, a question from Facebook. Doug, I'm going to shoot this one to you.
Okay.
Do you think these learning and development programs could be a differentiator for attracting digital natives to our organization? If so, how should we market it and include it in our recruiting efforts?
Wow, good question. Yes, I do think it can be. I think, one of the goals of the program was really trying to meet digital natives where they were. And I don't know if I spoke kind of like creatively about the format and the way that it looks, and it does mimic a lot of like kind of popular media and social media formats in terms of bringing people in. In terms of marketing, that's a great question. I've had this direct conversation with a couple of clients. And I think that in terms of marketing, it's about just kind of exposing them to the content, letting them see what it is, like showing the value of some very specific things around like how this will help them be better, and it's about getting it out there. The content lives inside of the professional skills subscription, inside an LMS, and I think there's ways to point to it and or pull it out of the LMS to bring people back in. And something else that's important, which I don't necessarily know as an answer to that question, but I want to be really clear about, the content that we built for DNA are these nano learning, less than 2-minute pieces of content, but they point to other pieces of kind of deeper learning inside the subscription. So while we might talk about communication and digital communication, we have additional courses that if you want to do a deeper dive into it, you can. If you want to know more, you can. I mean, from micro learning to a TED Talk, things that are linked together to like really drive home the topic that we're trying to help people with.
I love that. Yeah, I think in general, as learning practitioners, we need to do a much better job marketing our programs. If we build it, people don't necessarily come, and we need to kind of keep that as a North Star. Okay, so let's see something else. A question from Facebook. I know there's a lot that we need to evolve to meet the needs of digital natives at work. What should we keep doing? Megan, I'm going to shoot this to you first.
My goodness, it's so hard to know without like knowing.
I know.
Who are you? What
we'll
is your
assume
history?
all the best about the things that you're doing right now.
I think something that is, especially I would say in the last 10 years, as I've been thinking more about organizations and leadership in general, what you should keep doing is really staying steadfast to a mission and values. Like that is something that has transcended over decades, that the companies that stray away from values and stray away from their mission are generally the ones that we don't see around anymore. And the mindset around innovation and being willing to be quick and learn and adapt. So I would say that that's a big piece of it is we've used the word North Star, but like keeping that as a North Star I think is important, because if we can stay grounded in why we exist and what we do, we're able to make small adaptations along the way a lot easier, because you're realizing that adaptation is still allowing you to pursue goals and mission. So I would say that's it. I mean, in a very general kind of nebulous sense. It's kind of hard. I'm like, what do you do?
Sounded great to me.
That was a great answer.
Oh, okay.
Didn't sound nebulous at all.
I would say in general, in the terms of learning programs, questioner, depending on where you're at right now, keep thinking bigger about what learning can be in the organization. It could be meaningful coaching relationships, mentoring opportunity, crowdsourced content. Make your employees your best lieutenants in terms of find us the most helpful tutorials on these things. I think there's a big shift going on in HR and L&D specifically around kind of releasing the control reins of only learning comes out of the formal learning function, and we are slowly recognizing that learning happens all day long. Learning can be a moment, it can be a conversation, it can change someone for a lifetime based on something that's profound. So I would say keep doing that. as kind of a North Star.
Yep.
Okay, we have a very
thousands and where we're at today.
Can you talk about a couple of those things?
Yeah.
It's really important.
Yeah.
This is going back to your question when you asked me before. One point early on, and not to but when we looked at a timeline and looked at just like the things that have happened in Gen Z's lifetime, it's like, wow, they've grown up in a very different world than the millennials grew up. So I'd love for you to like talk about a couple of those
so
things.
I mean, when we think about millennials growing up, like I joke about like kind of all the fun kitschy things of like Lisa Frank was still super popular back then. Like we were looking at different TV, we were looking at different entertainment, we're also looking at different technology and different economy. And so we can distill down some of those big historical events and how that shapes millennials. The way that the 2008 recession has shaped millennials both in college and the job market, and how that's trickled out into their adulthood is very different. But for a lot of Generation Z, like they were barely making own allowance, let alone like any sort of income from a part-time job. So we can take a lot of these historical events and determine who are the young people and who are the adolescents at that time, and how does that influence how they are today and how they're going to be in the future. And so for Generation Z, there's a few really big things. We talked about the commercialization of the internet being a really big shaping factor of them not knowing a world without the internet and digital technology. But we also think like 9/11, that is a huge piece of American history that almost all of Generation Z is learning about from a history book.
wow.
And you think about how that shapes the way that we understand the world. And really, generations are they are collective cohorts of people that have a similar value set and viewpoint on the world, and that's really shaped on the world in which they grew up. And so we can't say that they're just millennial plus, because the world has just adapted so much and is so different. It would like be like saying like baby boomers are like silent generation plus. Like the worlds between what was happening in the 1930s and the 50s, so different. And so we have to give each generation their space and realize and really take the time to peel away what's going on during their childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood to really think what's happening.
And I think that's you touched on the recession. I think another thing when going back to that question, like when we started doing research, you think, wow, okay, this generation grew up with Amazon and Spotify and Netflix and the access, again, we talk about access to information, but also just the expectation that I have millions of songs available to me. I have millions of products available, and they will be here within 24 hours if I want it. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to make decisions based on what my friends like, what the people I follow like, ratings and reviews, and the socialization of brands, services, products, and then the decisions that get made based on that socialization didn't exist 20 years ago at all. Like it's crazy when you think about that. And so that's a major, I think, piece of just that in and of itself that's affected all of us in the end of the day, but Gen Z grew up with that.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you can take like all of these things that have happened and say, well, if they're millennials and Generation Z are so similar, well, what if we take one piece of history, imagine that taking place when you're 7 and kind of like figuring out like this is the world, or when you're 27. One of those is like complete habit formation, your behavior formation, and one is I might do things a little differently. I might shop on Amazon versus I've only known how to shop on Amazon to like order things and buy my home goods. Like that's such a different world to think about it. Like habit formation versus I might do things a little different.
So you've heard it here first. Megan Grace's rebuttal of digital natives are just millennial plus. Negative.
Hard no.
Not the case. Hard no.
Hard no.
And
Sorry.
whoever asked that question was not a digital native, because it would have been millennial extras. Not millennial plus, millennial
Sorry, I was
extra.
so hip with the
Millennial extra,
lingo.
yeah.
All right, we have time for one more here. I'm going to jump down. What do we know about work-life balance demands from digital natives? How can we talk about this?
I think that with digital natives and Generation Z and even millennials, we're seeing a little bit more of this like fluidity with time and space. That it's more hybrid than it is balance, knowing that not only in the time demands of work, but also the personal commitment and involvement of the self into work and seeing themselves as a community in their work. That if they don't feel like they're a part of an organization, they might leave. But if they do feel like they're part of an organization, they're going to stay. And they're probably going to stay very late. They're going to be very committed to that work. And so I think that work-life balance is really edging more towards this idea of hybrid and flexible work. and this idea that you might come to the office 3 days a week to do your in-person meetings, you've got 2 days a week to work on your own, where you need to do it to get your projects done, and being okay with that, because on those 2 days a week you might take a midday workout class, or you might run your errands, but you're also working until 9 or 10 o'clock at night to
Sounds
get your
great.
project done. Yeah, I love a midday workout class, but the reality of work is that is becoming more common, that we're able to actually facilitate projects at a distance, and give people kind of this autonomy to do the work that they want to do when they want to do it. And I think that it's going to really push up against this idea of the 9 to 5 and then balancing life. I think it's more of work-life integration.
And I think that goes back to just this growing up with an always-on ability to access information and also contribute to that too, right? You know, it doesn't matter if you're not there from 1 to 2, you're actually there from 8 to 9 and you're getting your work done, and the freedom and the flexibility to do it. And a lot of the research show, like Gen Z is making decisions on the jobs that they go into. Not always going to be about salary, it's going to be about that. It's going to be about their ability to have a life and integrate that into work, not outside of work, but they're all integrated into one.
Awesome. Well, look, we are at time, and unlike our late start, we're going to get you out on time today. This has been Cornerstone On Demand, talking about digital native advancement, DNA. I'm Summer, Doug, Megan. You've been a delight. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.